At 5:29 a.m. on July 16, 1945, the desert of New Mexico didn't just see a sunrise, it witnessed the birth of a new era. The sun itself seemed to explode, spilling light so bright it made the mountains cast shadows sharper than knives. Men who had sworn secrecy for years, trained to obey orders without question, found themselves laughing, crying, and staring, simply unable to comprehend the scale of what they had created. For a fleeting instant, humanity held the power of gods in its hands. The story begins not in the desert, but thousands of miles away, in the bustling streets of Manhattan. Scientists, dreamers, and exiles alike congregated in cramped apartments and lecture halls, drawn together by a single impossible goal: to unlock the atom. Among them were brilliant minds whose names would later become synonymous with genius. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the enigmatic physicist who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. Enrico Fermi, whose calm calculations hid a man perpetually on the edge of awe. And Niels Bohr, the philosopher-scientist whose every word carried both a warning and a hope. But the journey from theory to reality was a labyrinth of doubt, fear, and moral uncertainty. The European continent had fallen into chaos. Hitler's armies were pouring resources into the creation of a weapon that could end civilization. America, unprepared and under pressure, had to act. The Manhattan Project became the crucible where science, secrecy, and ambition collided. Laboratories were built in deserts, swamps, and secret towns, each a small world where ordinary rules no longer applied. Los Alamos, New Mexico became the heart of this experiment, a place where the brightest minds of a generation were isolated from the world, yet tasked with controlling it. Oppenheimer walked the compound with a mixture of reverence and dread. He knew what was coming, yet the human mind recoils from comprehending absolute power. Day by day, scientists assembled a machine that could rewrite history. Uranium-235 and plutonium-239, names that would later terrify nations, were carefully extracted, refined, and measured. Each step was a battle against nature itself. Splitting the atom was not merely chemistry or physics, it was an act of daring defiance. And then came the moment of truth, Trinity. On that morning, the desert sand glowed with an intensity no human eye was meant to endure. The shock wave rolled outward, tearing the landscape asunder, yet revealing a future where the impossible became possible. Eyewitnesses described a mushroom cloud rising in slow motion, like a giant breathing entity, indifferent to human fear. In those few seconds, decades of philosophical debate, political maneuvering, and painstaking experimentation coalesced into one undeniable reality: the atomic age had begun. Yet the story of the Manhattan Project is more than just physics. It is a tale of human complexity, where morality and survival intertwined. Colonel Leslie Groves, the military overseer, balanced bureaucracy with the personal responsibility of overseeing men who could create or destroy cities. Scientists wrestled with conscience. Many celebrated success while privately fearing the weapon's consequences. Letters, diaries, and clandestine meetings reveal a tapestry of internal conflict, ambition, and sorrow. Even as the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki months later, the men at Los Alamos carried the memory of Trinity with them, a haunting reminder that progress comes with a cost that can never be undone. Beyond the desert, ordinary Americans lived unaware of the cataclysmic forces being assembled in secret. Families went about their days, children played, and life seemed unchanged. Yet the shadow of the Manhattan Project extended into every home, every newspaper, every conversation about the war. When the first bombs fell on foreign soil, the full impact of years of unseen labor became terrifyingly visible. Cities were annihilated, lives were irrevocably altered, and the world realized that the rules of war had changed forever. This story is not merely about a bomb, it is about people, their courage, fear, and determination. It is about the intersection of science and humanity, ambition and ethics. From the deserts of New Mexico to the streets of Hiroshima, from the minds of brilliant scientists to the hands of policymakers, the narrative of the atomic age is as human as it is historical. And this is only the beginning. Behind each figure, each decision, lies a cascade of events, choices, and consequences, stories of espionage, political negotiation, technological triumph, and tragic loss that stretch far beyond a single desert morning.
Long before the first explosion of Trinity, the men and women of Los Alamos were already living in a kind of suspended reality. The desert, harsh and unyielding, seemed almost a fitting reflection of their task, to bend nature itself to human will. The town was a patchwork of temporary buildings, corrugated metal shacks, and prefabricated houses, a place designed for efficiency and secrecy rather than comfort. No one could leave without approval. Mail was censored. Conversations about their work were forbidden outside the walls. Yet within those confines, human drama played out in every office, laboratory, and mess hall. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the project's scientific director, was a man of contradictions, brilliant yet tortured, charismatic yet distant. He had the uncanny ability to inspire others while keeping his own doubts carefully hidden. In private, he wrestled with questions that had no scientific answer. Should we even create this? Do we have the right to wield such power? He spent long nights walking alone in the desert, thinking not of equations, but of humanity, of cities and children, of what it meant to possess the ultimate weapon. Enrico Fermi, on the other hand, was a man of calm pragmatism. He rarely spoke of philosophy or morality. To him, science was a problem to solve. But even Fermi could not escape the weight of their task. In one famous experiment, he and his colleagues built the first controlled nuclear chain reaction in Chicago, deep beneath the stands of a football stadium. The achievement was monumental, yet Fermi's meticulous notes reveal a man quietly aware that they had crossed a threshold. Once the atom could be split at will, nothing would ever be the same. The women of the project, though often overshadowed in history, were equally remarkable. Scientists, mathematicians, and engineers worked tirelessly in laboratories, calculating trajectories, refining bomb designs, and managing vast data sets with slide rules and hand-cranked calculators. One such woman, Leona Woods Marshall, was instrumental in designing critical aspects of the bomb's internal mechanisms. She worked alongside men who were giants in their field, yet her brilliance shone in every calculation she performed. In a place dominated by secrecy and masculine bravado, these women were quietly reshaping what was possible. Espionage and fear were constant companions. Reports of Nazi scientists fleeing Europe or of potential spies infiltrating the project made every letter, every conversation, every shipment a matter of national security. Colonel Leslie Groves, the military overseer, treated security with a near obsessive rigor. Guards patrolled the perimeters, fences were electrified, and all work was compartmentalized. Few people understood the full scope of the project. Most only knew their small portion, a puzzle piece in a vast, unseen design. Yet amid the tension, moments of humanity persisted. The scientists would gather for music, chess, and philosophical debates. They argued not only about fission, chain reactions, and plutonium, but about art, poetry, and the ethics of their work.
Oppenheimer himself quoted Sanskrit texts and discussed philosophy late into the night, as if to remind everyone that even in the shadow of annihilation, humanity could still seek beauty and wisdom. As the months passed, the physical challenges grew. The bomb's core materials, uranium-235 and plutonium-239, were extraordinarily difficult to produce. Facilities in Oak Ridge, Tennessee and Hanford, Washington ran 24/7, pushing men and machines to their limits. Workers often didn't know why they labored so tirelessly, only that their results would be fed into the desert laboratories of Los Alamos. Radiation hazards, chemical explosions, and mechanical failures became daily risks. Lives were lost, limbs were scarred, and still, the calculations, assemblies, and tests continued. By early 1945, the project entered its final, frantic phase. The war in Europe had ended, but the Pacific campaign raged. Japan had proven resilient. Conventional bombing, no matter how devastating, had failed to bring surrender. President Truman and his advisors now faced a terrible choice: use the bomb and potentially end the war, or wait, risking even more death and destruction. The decision weighed heavily not only on political leaders, but on the scientists themselves. Oppenheimer and his team, now working around the clock, prepared the Trinity test in secret. Every detail had to be perfect: the assembly of the bomb, the placement of instruments, the measurement of blast effects. Calculations were double-checked, cross-checked, and rechecked. Yet no one could predict the full magnitude of what would happen. The desert, silent for centuries, awaited the birth of a new age. And then, on July 16, 1945, at exactly 5:29 a.m., the world changed forever. The first flash of light was blinding. Those watching from miles away described a sensation of staring into the sun itself. The shock wave flattened the surrounding desert like a hand sweeping across sand. A mushroom cloud rose, twisting into the sky, growing taller and wider with each passing second. Instruments recorded data, men shouted numbers, and yet no calculation could capture the awe, fear, and terror in the hearts of the observers. It was not just a test of physics, it was a test of human conscience. For a fleeting moment, the desert held the fate of millions. Those present would carry the memory forever, knowing they had glimpsed both the zenith of human ingenuity and the abyss of human destruction.
The morning of July 16, 1945, began quietly. The desert was calm, the air still, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Scientists and military officers gathered at the observation point, miles away from the test site, clutching clipboards, cameras, and instruments. Each man and woman present carried the weight of a future none of them fully understood. J. Robert Oppenheimer, standing among his colleagues, felt a familiar tremor of doubt. He thought of the Bhagavad Gita, a text he had memorized and reflected upon throughout the project. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The words echoed in his mind as he watched the desert horizon, waiting for the first moment that would forever divide history into before and after. At precisely 5:29 a.m., the plutonium core at the center of the bomb reached critical mass. For the briefest instant, silence reigned. Then came a flash so bright that it painted the desert in shades no human had ever seen. Some scientists instinctively shielded their eyes. Others, mesmerized, could do nothing but stare. The light was followed by a shock wave that rolled outward with incomprehensible force. The ground itself trembled, the mountains seemed to shudder, and the desert sand leapt into the sky, sparkling in the blinding light. Eyewitnesses later described the experience as both horrifying and sublime. Kenneth Bainbridge, the test director, reportedly muttered to Oppenheimer, "Now we are all sons of bitches."
A mix of awe, relief, and dread rippled through the crowd. Instruments recorded data, cameras clicked frantically, and men shouted numbers, but no measurement could convey the human scale of what they had just witnessed. As the mushroom cloud rose and expanded, it became a symbol of human ingenuity and human hubris. The plume stretched miles into the sky, carrying heat, light, and the promise of destruction. At that moment, it was not a weapon yet. It was a statement. The atom had been conquered. The desert, which had witnessed countless suns rise and set, now bore witness to something new, the dawn of the atomic age. But even as the scientists celebrated the successful detonation, unease shadowed every mind. Many understood the moral implications instantly. How could they reconcile the exhilaration of discovery with the destruction it portended? Letters from some of the team reveal private anguish. Niels Bohr, ever the philosopher, wrote to colleagues about the terrifying responsibility now resting on humanity. Across the Pacific, unaware of the desert's transformation, the war continued. In Tokyo, cities had already endured relentless conventional bombing. Civilians, innocent men, women, and children lived under constant threat. The Trinity test was intended to demonstrate power, to persuade political leaders that Japan could be forced to surrender. But even as planners debated the ethics and necessity of using the bomb, the human cost remained abstract, confined to reports, statistics, and maps. The decision to deploy the atomic bomb was made swiftly after the test. President Truman, advised by military leaders and the scientists themselves, authorized the missions over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On August 6, 1945, the city of Hiroshima was engulfed in a flash of light and heat that obliterated everything within miles of ground zero. An estimated 70,000 people died instantly, with tens of thousands more succumbing to injuries and radiation in the weeks that followed. 3 days later, Nagasaki experienced similar devastation. News of the bombings stunned the world. In America, newspapers reported the events with both awe and horror. Headlines praised the scientific achievement while grappling with its moral implications. Letters from soldiers, journalists, and ordinary citizens reveal a nation caught between pride and fear. Across the globe, governments scrambled to understand the new balance of power. The war ended swiftly thereafter, but the atomic age had already begun, reshaping diplomacy, ethics, and warfare forever. Meanwhile, the scientists of Los Alamos returned to a world forever changed. Some celebrated quietly, others wrestled with guilt. Oppenheimer famously expressed regret, warning that scientists had known sin in their creation. Yet few could deny the monumental achievement. Humanity had unlocked a force so powerful that it could alter the course of history in an instant. The legacy of the Manhattan Project extended far beyond the desert. It ignited the Cold War, spurred nuclear proliferation, and reshaped the ethical discourse of science. It inspired films, books, and debates that continue to this day. And through it all, the desert of New Mexico remained, a silent witness to the birth of a power both magnificent and terrifying, a reminder that human ingenuity carries consequences as profound as the discovery itself.
The sun rose over Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, but it was a sunrise unlike any other. The city had been reduced to smoldering ruins. Streets were unrecognizable, buildings had vanished, leaving only twisted steel, ash, and dust. Survivors wandered in shock, their faces burned, their eyes wide with disbelief. Some were lucky to be alive, but the weight of loss pressed down on every step. Families were torn apart, parents searched for children, Siblings for siblings, neighbors for neighbors. The chaos was unimaginable. Among the survivors was a young school teacher named Yuki Tanaka. She had been sheltering in a makeshift bomb shelter with 20 children when the blast struck. The explosion lifted the roof from the ground, leaving her momentarily dazed. When she emerged, she saw the sky filled with a cloud of smoke and fire, and a city transformed into a wasteland. Yuki would later recount, in trembling words, how she carried children through streets of rubble, guiding them past the shadows burned into the asphalt, the living ghosts left by heat so intense it had etched their silhouettes permanently. In Nagasaki, 3 days later, the horror repeated itself. The city's unique geography, a valley surrounded by hills, amplified the blast. Tens of thousands perished instantly. Countless more would die from injuries and radiation sickness in the following weeks. Families were left fractured, medical systems overwhelmed, and survivors haunted by what they had seen. One boy, Hiroshi Nakamura, recalled the strange silence after the bomb. No birds, no dogs, no wind, only an eerie stillness that lingered over the ruined city. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in the United States, news of the bombings reached Manhattan Project scientists with mixed emotions. Some felt relief that the war was finally over. Others, including Oppenheimer and several of his colleagues, wrestled with guilt and fear. Letters and journals reveal private anguish. Scientists debated the morality of what they had done, the power they had unleashed, and the lives extinguished in an instant. Many asked themselves a question that would haunt them for decades. Could humanity control such power, or had we unleashed a force we could never contain? Life at Los Alamos changed dramatically after the war. The once secret city became a site of reflection, mourning, and scientific transition. Some scientists continued nuclear research under the auspices of the new Atomic Energy Commission. Others, like Oppenheimer, became outspoken advocates for international control of nuclear weapons, warning of the dangers of proliferation. Personal lives were affected too. Many struggled with relationships, isolation, and the psychological burden of having contributed to unparalleled destruction. In the broader world, the atomic bomb reshaped politics and international relations. Japan surrendered unconditionally, ending the deadliest conflict in human history. Yet the shadow of the bomb loomed large over the globe. The Soviet Union, recognizing the United States' new nuclear capability, accelerated its own atomic program, setting the stage for the Cold War. Diplomacy, strategy, and military planning all were rewritten in the light of atomic power. Ethical debates erupted in scientific communities and public forums. Newspapers carried editorials questioning whether humanity had the right to possess such destructive power. Religious leaders, philosophers, and scientists weighed in. Oppenheimer himself testified before Congress, advocating restraint and international cooperation, but he was met with suspicion in the emerging climate of Cold War paranoia. Many of the scientists who had once worked together in harmony found themselves divided as moral and political perspectives collided. The survivors in Japan became living testaments to the bomb's human cost. They formed communities, documented experiences, and shared stories that would educate future generations. Hospitals struggled to treat burns, radiation sickness, and psychological trauma. Children born in the aftermath faced genetic effects, often invisible but devastating. Monuments were erected, peace movements arose, and the shadow of Hiroshima and Nagasaki became a global symbol, a warning of what humans could achieve and what they must avoid. Yet, amid destruction, there were sparks of resilience. Cities slowly rebuilt, families reconnected, and survivors found ways to reclaim life. Human stories of courage, compassion, and endurance emerged alongside grief and loss.
Teachers like Yuki Tanaka returned to classrooms. Scientists devoted themselves to medicine, energy, and peaceful applications of nuclear technology. Artists, writers, and filmmakers transformed tragedy into works that carried lessons far beyond national borders. The Manhattan Project, Trinity, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki were not just chapters of history. They were mirrors reflecting the full complexity of humanity. Brilliant minds, ethical dilemmas, military necessity, political strategy, and the unspeakable suffering of ordinary people all converged in a single historical arc. The atomic age was born in fire and shadow, yet it forced the world to confront questions that remain unresolved even today. How much power should humanity wield? How do we balance progress with morality? And what price is too high for victory?